One thing is clear. The automotive hobby is all about cars, even though it's safe to say that you can't relate to the hobby without having a car. Today's video is all about the excitement of the RC hobby. As kids, we played with toys and diecasts. As we grew up, we watched TV and played video games. All these things made us into the fans we are now. Some people, though, just can't be satisfied by seeing cars on TV or a shelf. Their cars need to be real, but smaller, able to be driven, but easier to take care of, and not a bother to the rest of the world while still giving the same feeling as if you were driving out there. This may be why there are people who like to play with radio control. So what's got them excited? When you think about it, it still makes sense for someone who owns and drives a real car to be interested in RC cars. With all the traffic in the metro, we don't have many places to drive our real cars. When we don't have time to get out and drive, we can easily scratch our driving itch with a real RC car. Space wouldn't be much of a problem, especially compared to a real car, which would need a good garage. You'd be surprised how many people get into the hobby even though they already have a car in their garage that works pretty well. That's how fun these things can be, especially if you have friends to play with. RC cars come in a wide range of quality, just like most other things. You can buy toy-grade models at your local toy store, but that's not the kind of RCs we're talking about here. Hobby-grade models are the ones we're talking about. They must be put together, painted, tuned properly, and have lots of small details to look and drive as much like their 1:1 counterparts as possible. We'll talk about two types of RCs we're familiar with and show you what each has to offer. Most of these are 1:10th scale, but they have different chassis, parts, and general uses for different purposes. But for people just starting in the hobby, would suggest trying out a scale RC vehicle that's a no-brainer, a crawler. A crawler RC is just another name for an off-road rig. These radio-controlled cars are made to go over big obstacles like rocks or logs. Their chassis, suspension, and movement are just like the real thing. Even though they don't have much going for them in terms of speed, you'd be surprised at how well these things can go over obstacles and climb up rock faces. Crawlers are easy to get into because there are many ready-to-run kits at different price points. They are also very durable and compared to other RCs require the least fine-tuning. There are many ways to customize, and yes, you can change the shell of your favorite vehicle to polycarbonate to match your chassis. If you want to meet more hobbyists, the Manila Scale 4x4 RC Forums Facebook group is a good place to start. There, you can find out about trails and competitions. The thrill of the crawler doesn't come from how fast it goes. Instead, it's more like a toy that defies the laws of physics because it can usually climb things that other vehicles can't. But crawlers are still a good way to get started in the hobby if you just want to have fun with them. Whether you're on a hike or just hanging out at the beach, a crawler will give you and your friends something else to do on your trip. Even though the crawler is a good way to start the hobby, it's not usually the very first thing that comes to mind when we think of radio-controlled cars. Still, we've turned to a different kind of RC that hits closer to home for our viewers. Drift RCs. Since drifting became a popular type of motorsport, RC fans have tried to set up their touring or rally chassis so that it can slide and drift like a real car. There are now chassis, motors, servos, and even gyros that are all made specifically for making an RC go sideways. When you add in the culture and media around these types of cars, you can't help but think about how it would be to drive one. It sure is a lot of fun. From what we've seen, getting into drift RCs takes more research than just buying a crawler ready to go. Diehard fans will tell you that you'll get more for your money if you build your own kit using mix and match parts instead of buying one off the shelf. Plus, since they drive very differently, you should also consider whether you want an all-wheel drive kit or a rear-wheel drive kit. On the other hand, the rear-wheel drive platform is becoming more popular because of how realistic it is and how well it handles it. The problem is that these tend to cost more because they need a gyro to compensate for counter steering. You would be very grateful for YouTube reviews on these things since they can be very detailed and cost a lot of money, like any hobby. When you compare the rough, no-frills driving of a crawler to that of a Drift RC, the chassis of the Drift RC will be much more flexible, like a real race car. Fine-tuning the suspension will improve the car's handle, and how they are set will significantly affect how your car drives. If you want to learn, you can also learn the basics of the suspension geometry, which adds to the fun of getting these things to slide sideways. The problem with Drift RCs is that you need a smooth, wide surface to use them well. If you want to keep your chassis together, this limits where you can play with them. On top of that, drifting takes some time to get used to because the throttle and steering are very sensitive and need a bit of precision to work right. Get that down though, and the hobby becomes much more fun. And all the money you spend is worth it when you hit the clipping points just right, or when you're out in tandem with a few friends. There are many other kinds of RCs like buggies, touring cars, and even tanks. But since we're only talking about how these RCs relate to our hobby, these two types should be enough to get you as close as possible to a 1:1 experience. No matter how you do it, RCs are a great hobby for a gearhead. Thanks for watching. Do like and subscribe to our channel to see videos with similar content.